Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and today we're going to do something we try to do a lot at Crash Course: punch eagles. Also, help you understand the news better. Now, we're not going to explain it like Ezra Klein, well, we sort of will, or break it down into graphs and charts like Nate Silver, or slow jam it like Jimmy Fallon. We're not going to slow jam it, Stan! Instead, bureaucrat Jimmy and I are going to give you some tools you need to better understand news stories and opinions about government and politics by describing the various types of bureaucracies that affect our lives. Ain't that right, BJ? Yeah. There are a number of ways we can try to make sense of the vast federal bureaucracy, and one of the most straightforward is to categorize the different agencies by type. Now, labeling them this way doesn't actually tell us what they do, but you'll see them labeled this way in books and articles, so you should be familiar with the terms that political writers use. The first type of bureaucracy is the cabinet-level agency, also called the executive department. Each of the 15 departments is usually headed by a secretary, except the Justice Department, which is run by the Attorney General. You can find a list of the executive departments in any good textbook, and I bet there might be a list on the internet somewhere too. Maybe. But the ones you hear the most about are the State Department, the Department of Defense, and the Treasury Department. Others, like the Department of the Interior or Housing and Urban Development, you usually only hear about when there's a new secretary or a scandal. Executive departments mostly provide services through sub-agencies. For example, the FBI is technically part of the Department of Justice, and the FDA is part of the Department of Health and Human Services. There are also independent agencies that are very similar to executive departments because their heads require Senate confirmation. Well, their whole body requires. I'm talking about the head like they're the boss, the head of the agency. The best example here is the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, but NASA is another independent agency. Next, we have the independent regulatory commissions, which are supposed to be further removed from presidential oversight, which makes them independent. You can recognize them because they're usually called commissions, like the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. They all have rule-making authority and the power to punish violations of the rules, often through fines. If you pay attention to stories about banking, especially banking malfeasance, you'll find plenty of stories about SEC fines. Last, and pretty much least, frankly, are the government corporations that are supposed to make profits, but in fact tend to rely on government subsidies to stay afloat. The U.S. Postal Service and Amtrak are the best known, and for most Americans, these are the agencies with which we have the most contact, especially the post office. A more useful way to think about bureaucracies is in terms of what they actually do, their functions, although the problem here is that many bureaucracies have more than one function. Maybe the thought bubble can help us out. Thought bubble! Let's do this! Some bureaucracies primarily serve clients. Many of the sub-agencies of the cabinet departments fit this bill, with the most obvious being the Food and Drug Administration, which serves the public by testing and approving new drugs, the Centers for Disease Control, which tries to do exactly what the name suggests, and the National Institutes of Health, which, among other things, sponsors research that improves citizens' health. All of these agencies are under the auspices of the Department of Health and Human Services. Another good example of a client-serving agency is the Department of Agriculture, which, in addition to rating meat, administers the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is the snappy new name for food stamps. A second function that many agencies perform is to maintain the union. One way agencies maintain the union is by collecting revenue, because without money, the country doesn't function. The main agency in charge of collecting revenue is the IRS. A second form of maintaining the union is providing security for its citizens. The Department of Justice, which prosecutes federal crimes and protects civil rights, and the Department of Homeland Security, which among other things is in charge of airport security, are the main agencies that ensure internal security. Bureaucracies also keep Americans safe from external threats. This is the job of various intelligence services like the CIA and NSA, and especially the Department of Defense. A third function of bureaucracies is to regulate economic activity, primarily by creating and enforcing rules and regulations. Some of the agencies primarily charged with enforcing regulations are housed within executive departments, like OSHA within the Department of Labor. Others, like the FCC and SEC, are independent. The fourth major function of bureaucracies is closely related to regulating economic activity. Some bureaucracies have the primary function of redistributing economic resources. Agencies concerned with fiscal and monetary policy handle the inflow and outflow of money in the economy through taxes, spending, and interest rates. Providing direct aid to the poor or welfare is another function of bureaucracies that is even more complex and controversial. Most of these agencies, like the Social Security Administration, provide direct services, so we can see the overlap between the function of agencies. Thanks, Thought Bubble. I've been suggesting that even though they aren't mentioned in the Constitution, bureaucracies are pretty powerful, so I should probably explain where that power comes from. Basically, Thor's hammer. Actually, no, it doesn't come from that at all. It comes from Congress, which, as we've seen, delegates power to executive agencies in varying degrees. But once the agencies exist, they create power for themselves by maximizing their budgets. Bureaucracies lobby for their own interests, and the bigger and more important they are, the more money they get from Congress. We tend to think that the national defense is important, so the Department of Defense is able to convince Congress to give it lots of money. Although more money can lead to more problems, as Biggie helpfully reminded us. Money is also probably the most important lever of power in the U.S. In addition to getting money for themselves, another source of of bureaucratic power is the expertise of bureaucrats themselves. The president, and especially Congress, will often rely on bureaucratic experts to tell them how a policy will be implemented. The source of their power is the expert's command of useful information. You shouldn't underestimate this, as any number of technology companies will tell you. So those are two ways of thinking about bureaucracies. I hope that they're helpful, and at least when you hear about the FCC issuing a fine for Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction or something, you'll understand who's doing the punishing. And when you read about Congress cutting SNAP funding, you'll be like, oh, SNAP! That's tied up with the Farm Bill. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next episode. Crash Course Government and Politics is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. Support for Crash Course Government comes from Vocal. Vocal supports nonprofits that use technology and media to advance social equity. Learn more about their mission and initiatives at vocal.org. Crash Course was made with the help of all these wardrobe malfunctions. Thanks for watching.